Do you know where you stand? Not with any legal body, nor authority, nor divinity, but the land itself. Do you know the name of it? The name of its people? The name of who's buried on it? Names, names, names. Not far from me, there is a river. It's called the Soliloquy. It is an example of a hydrogen substrate, which is an archaic and linguistic way of saying it is the name of a water body left over from a previous culture that no longer inhabits the area or exists. The name comes from the Tuaquan language, the language of the people who lived in this northern part and central part of Florida at the beginning of the recorded history of the region. The Tuaquans do not exist anymore. Their language has been silent for centuries. Their land is now inhabited by the likes of me and my people and our race. Our race being that of Americans. Not of any specific black, white, African, or European origin, but rather when I say race, I mean our cultural homogeneity. That we may have our differences and yet we are all the same imperial species. That imperial species is the most powerful in the world today. More than any other in history. We, the people of the United States of America, have something that no other people in human history, neither then nor today, has achieved. And that is the ability to impart our will onto any part of the earth as we see fit within a few hours' notice. In previous eras, mountain passes and rivers used to make sending messages take months. And yet, because of the achievements of my era, of the era before mine, and the era before that one, I can send a message to someone in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and they will receive it before I can so much as blink. Someone can be in Kandahar from the place I am now with modern technology before the sun goes down. That is unimaginable to the people of previous eras. And yet here I am saying it now. It is truly remarkable. And what brought us to this point? It is foolish to look at history like it's linear. Like everything is a continuous evolution going in one direction of progress. And yet, the more steps back I take, the more I see not a progression, positive or negative, but rather a perpetual state of adaptation. That for every new condition in reality, there is a reverse to that, an adaptation to it. And that adaptation is the manifestation of, in my opinion, the true meaning of this world: power. The statement "might makes right" is so oversaid and so heavily repeated and so heavily scrutinized and bastardized that it's almost humorous. It's a boogeyman. Might makes right is such a typical and humorous example of what villainy in a traditional sense is. That if someone is going to declare to you that they have a right to do something because they have the power to do it, you can already guess that they're a villain. But the more I look into it, the more I break it down, the more I take it apart, it seems more and more simplistic. It's true. I am sitting on the land with the Timucuan. And the Timucuan do not exist anymore. And the ones who came after them, the Spanish are gone too. There are ramparts in St. Augustine, and yet St. Augustine is not defended by them anymore. It was the city they built, and yet it is American now. Who came after the Spanish? Well, a myriad of groups. The Spanish never quite held that firm control. There were the Seminole, who came and filled the void where the Spanish would not penetrate. And those Seminole, they were a people like us Americans, in the sense that they were not one people in origin, they were not one culture, they were not one language, and they were not one history. They were a group that banded together because they needed one thing more than anything else. The one thing history had taught them was of the utmost importance, and that was power. The Seminole came here to Florida because they had the power to escape, and the power to set up defenses, and the power to be free from colonization here in Florida. And yet, I do not speak to you from the Seminole Reservation. I do not speak to you from the Seminole Nation. I speak to you from the state of Florida of the United States of America, and I speak to you in English. And that is because the Seminole, the warrior people, although they were a warrior people who knew the truth of this world, and that truth being power, they did not have enough of it. They lost. And they were expelled from this region. And they were sent to the Everglades as they fell back further and further to continue their existence free from tyranny. And here I am. I show you that tyranny. Tyranny is not always an oppressive government. Tyranny is not always inherently evil. Tyranny is projecting power with impunity. That is exactly what America can and has done, and it's progressively slipping further and further out of our hands. I lament it. What determines whose land this really was, the Timucuan, the Spanish, the Seminole, or mine, the American. It was not who was buried in the land and has the historic right to it, and it was not who rightfully deserved it. It was who had the power to administer it. And because we have the power to administer it, Spain's loss of Florida is not a conquest, it is a decolonization. The death of the Timucuans is not a genocide, it is a natural disaster. And the expulsion and the confinement of the Seminole people isn't a violent conquest and colonization. It's a civilization. The sole decider between any of those distinctions, one can argue, is the right of the beholder, but the eye of the beholder means nothing if it has no tangible influence. And even if it defies the reality itself of the era, the tangible influence dictates that our violent conquest of this land wasn't violent conquest, it was civilization. And I do not declare it to be right or wrong in some archaic moral sense, no, not at all. I simply try to observe it without lamenting it. Because in truth, it matters not what men think of war. War will endure. It's like asking men what they think of stone. Before we were, war merely waited. From the beginning of life itself, cells competed with cells to see who could reproduce better, reproduce more, which versions could reproduce better. They out-adapted each other time and time again. And that was the first instance of war. And that constant adaptation, first in DNA, but then man came along. And man did something special that few other species could, most certainly not to our extreme. We could adapt in real time without life, death, or reproduction. We could learn new things. We could build tools. We could build machines. We were something unique. We are still. And that is what makes us the greatest species, because we merely mastered a war that had existed as long as life itself. The history of man is one brutal. It is one full of lies, and is one that has no real truth. And yet it is beautiful. And I see beauty in it now. But I feel terror. Every day I'm terrified with this reality. That there is no law, no rules, no accountability, merely violence, merely war, and merely power. But there's also something beautiful in it. Looking at the way humans have had to cope with that fact. It didn't occur to me in the past when I did hold my faith to my heart, but it does occur to me now that religion maybe started out as people trying to find a way to hold the most powerful accountable. Their suffering became bearable and their mass slaughter became bearable because in their minds, some God would come save them. And when no God came to save them, they found ways to make that God save them in their minds. Oh, I'm not going to be saved in this life, but I'll be saved in the next. Oh, my persecutor won't be punished now. He'll be punished in there or up there. When he dies, his soul will go to some eternal damnation. As if such a thing, no, I shouldn't be blasphemous. But I see thoughts and I see the lines between them. And I lamented. I could ramble and ramble and ramble and find no answers that are satisfactory, because in truth I have cognitive dissonance. I do not want to believe the truth of this world, that power is the sole decider. And yet, by believing it, and by trying to grasp that power, and by playing power to my advantage, I can achieve the changes in the world I want. I've been begging myself, let go of my attachments to this world as anything but a river of war. And if I let go of my attachments, I can swim in that river and manipulate the world around me to be what I want it to be. I don't need to be afraid anymore. I don't need to be terrified of the lack of accountability. Because by pursuing that power, I will be the one who holds those to account. I will join their ranks. I've lost myself. At some point along the way, my heart went cold. I realized that there was no salvation in this world. And it made me realize that the only salvation I need is within this world. It made me realize that I need to stop waiting to be saved, but to save myself, and to grasp that power to save others, and to take it by any means necessary. Morality and personal morals and ideals and altruism mean nothing if you don't have the power to impart them onto the world around you. A good person with no power changes the world all the same as an evil person with no power, or an apathetic person. And they find reasons to justify their complacence, and I will do no such thing. I have no illusions that I'm anything resembling a good person. I won't pretend to you that I have a life worth living. The only person who can convince is myself, and whoever has power over me. And that's where I stand. Perhaps one day the world will be different. Perhaps one day the billions of years of war will come to an end. But it is denial to hold out and wait for it. So I will do what I must. And I will try. And I will likely fail. But failure or not, I will have imparted my power unto the world. And that is what gives my life value.